Hi everybody, Mr. Bowl here with Year 5, Lesson 2 on our history topic, the impact of war. At the moment we're looking at World War One. As you'll remember, the dates of World War One are 1914 to 1918. This is a recap of Lesson 1, these 4 pictures. And if you haven't done Lesson 1 yet, then you need to do that first. This is Lesson 2. Right, quick recap. So we saw all these 4 pictures in the first lesson. So I want you to spend 30 seconds remembering and saying it out loud to the screen what each of these is. Okay, pause the video if you haven't had time to do it yet. But the first one, I think you'll remember, he's the Archduke Ferdinand. He's the man who got shot, and his death led to World War One. This is a massive warship called a dreadnought. And try and remember that name. And Britain had more of these than Germany, but both sides were competing with each other in a race to see who could have the most. And this is one of the reasons that World War One kicked off. This is a map showing the land that Germany took from France in 1870, from last time. And the French were very, very upset about that and were hoping to get this land back. So they were ready for a war. So when the Archduke got shot, they jumped in straight away to try and see if they could get their land back. And this is a map which you will have drawn for the last lesson, a map showing the two sides. These are the main countries involved. The UK, that's us, France, Russia, we're all on the same side. And then on the other side, Germany with Austria-Hungary. Okay, so that's a recap. The war started. Now today's lesson is about trench warfare. So today's lesson is all about trench war. Here's a picture of a World War One trench. And we're going to be looking at 2 questions. By the end of today's lesson, you should be able to answer the question, what does it mean? What is a trench war? And the second one, why was World War One a trench war? So the start of World War One in August of 1914, this is a picture in Britain of lots of people. You can see how cheerful they are. They're looking forward to joining the army. They can't wait. Everybody had been telling them it's going to be fine. The whole thing will be over by Christmas. So that's about 4 or 5 months. And we're definitely going to win. And you want to get yourself in the army to make sure you're supporting your country. And also, what's everybody going to think of you if you don't join the army? People might think you're a coward or a traitor. So you get yourself down there now, and they're all cheering and they love it. Okay, so that's how the atmosphere was at the beginning of the war. Unfortunately, it wasn't over by Christmas. As you know, it took 4 years. I'm sad to say most of the people in that first picture probably died or at least got serious injury. And over the whole of Europe, millions of people died. So it was a terrible war, and it didn't move fast, and we didn't win quickly. This is a line showing the trenches all the way from the English Channel, going right the way down here, all the way down to Switzerland. Okay, and along that line, basically the Western Front, the bit that Britain was involved in, that didn't move very far for the whole of the 4 years. And people were fighting back and forward over the same land in this area, lots of people being killed. Sometimes we advanced a couple of miles, sometimes the Germans advanced a couple of miles. But basically, most of the war was fought in this area with hardly anybody making any progress, because it was a war fought in trenches. And that's what we're going to look at today. This side is the German side. When you see this here, this flag, then you've got the Belgian side. They were on our side, Britain, France. Later, the United States joined. They joined the war in 1917, and their army came across in 1917, 1918. And that is one of the factors, not the only one, but it's one of the factors why the Britain and France side did win in the end in 1918. So World War One, battles like the ones we saw there on the previous slide. We looked at this one just up here. This is called the Battle of Vimy. Okay, and the graves linked. This is the graves at Vimy Ridge, and sadly, each of these is a person who died. At Vimy, lots of Canadian soldiers died, as well as British soldiers and German soldiers, and this is the war graves for those people. And we went to Tile Barn last year, as I'm sure you remember, and we stayed in these pods, and I expect that many of you will be able to remember the names of your pods, and as you remember from last year, lots of the pods are named after battles that were fought in World War One. Right, question 1 for today's lesson. What is a trench war? So I want you to, in a minute, when I put all the arrows on this screen, I want you to pause the video and see if you can make a note on a piece of paper of everything that you can see in this picture here of a World War One. This is a British trench. Okay, there's various people in this trench. You might not be able to see them all at first, but this is a person here, and this is also a person over here. Okay, they're not dead. So what is happening in this trench? I'm going to put some arrows on to help you with your ideas, because I think you can spot something where every one of these arrows goes in, and you may also be able to spot a few other things as well. So what are the guys in this picture doing? What equipment do they have? Sorry, pressed the wrong button. And you're going to pause the video and write down as many ideas as you can think of. Right. Now, hopefully you've got written down at least 6 ideas for what's happening in this picture. So, first one. What's this chap doing? Well, he's fast asleep. And why is he so tired that he's able to just sleep in this very uncomfortable position? Probably because he's been on guard duty all night. So he's exhausted. When the guns finally stop, every now and again you probably get a bit more sleep, but most of the time the guns will be going, both sides. Very heavy, noisy guns, very difficult to sleep, and he is totally exhausted. What's this? Now this arrow is pointing to these. I hope you had an idea or a guess about these. These are bags full of sand. And the idea is, if a bomb hits, there'll be little bits of the bomb will fly everywhere called shrapnel. And those bits, if you're behind a sandbag, the shrapnel won't get you, won't go into your skin, maybe won't hurt you. So you want to be behind a sandbag. And the other thing they're good for is sometimes when it was rainy, these trenches would flood, and the sandbag's good at absorbing the water. You might have seen some out on near people's houses during the recent floods. So people still use these to stop floods. So that's what they are. They're sandbags. Right, now if you look closely, this is nice. You'll like this. This chap here, he's probably exhausted as well, but he's not going to sleep because he's busy writing a letter, probably to his wife. So that's nice, isn't it? He's trying to keep in touch. And I know that in year 6 you'll be doing a unit which involves writing a letter home, as if you were a soldier in World War One. You write a letter home to your wife. So that's interesting to see. People obviously still cared about their family. What's this thing? Down by this chap's feet. This is called a mess tin. And in here, you'd have your food. So you go along to the canteen when they call you, and you get your food put into these tins. So in the morning, you might get some porridge. And then later on, you might have some biscuits and perhaps for dinner, a bit of stew. There's another one there. Right, this arrow, I'm sure you got this one. These are all the rifles stacked up. So all the people who are not on duty, they can stack their rifle there out of the way. Obviously, you need to be careful with your rifle so it doesn't accidentally go off in your own trench and hurt somebody who's on your own side. So they have to be stacked carefully. This is pointing to the roof. This is called a dugout. So the area in there, they could go in there when it's raining or when it's their turn to not be on duty. That's where they would try and sleep. And this is the roof. But as you can see, it's, even though they've had a good job trying to make it as sturdy as possible, unfortunately, because the weather was really bad, it's started to probably leaks. It's basically not very nice. And these other chaps here, they've probably been on guard duty as well and they're fast asleep. There's some more sandbags. The enemy is probably up and over this way, and they'll be staying in their own trench. Right, now on this slide, again on your piece of paper, I want you to make some notes and try and work out where each of these labels goes. So I've covered them all up. Here they are, the little blue boxes. Okay, where do the labels go? So where's the barbed wire? Where are the sandbags? So pause the video and work them all out. Okay, hopefully you've worked them all out. Let's go over them now. Here's the first one. So I'm going to press the button and get rid of the blue box. So this area here is called no man's land. So that's a phrase that was used in World War I for the land. This is the land between this trench, where this chap is, and the enemy. And this land in the middle doesn't belong to anybody. It doesn't belong to the British or the Germans or the French, so they called it no man's land. The next bit that's been revealed here is the barbed wire. I'm sure you got that. And when the enemy's coming across, you're hoping that they're going to get slowed down and caught up on this barbed wire, and that'll give you a chance to shoot them. So that's something to protect the people who are in this trench. Here's the next one. This is an elbow rest. So the soldier, when he fires his gun at the enemy, he can stand up a bit higher and lean over and put his rifle on top here on the parapet, and then that's where he's going to rest his elbow. The rest of the time he doesn't want to stand up there because then he could be shot, so he stands lower down. He's going to stay lower, so his head is not in view of the enemy. I expect you got this one as well, the ammunition shelf. So this is a box of ammunition, spare cartridges for his gun. Here's the fire step. So he's going to stand on that when it's time to fire, when he's been ordered to keep an eye out or to fire at the enemy. Fire step. These ones, this is the duck boards, and underneath is the idea of the sump is to drain away some of the water. Unfortunately, it did rain so much in the first winter of 1914 that a lot of these trenches became flooded, and this drainage didn't really work. This bit is a dugout, and sometimes you dig out a bit further back here and try and make it into an area where you could sleep. And then I'm sure you got these, the sandbags. Then the last three are things that are on the soldier. Okay, so there's no writing for these, but I'm sure you got them. Where's his tin hat? It's there, obviously, on top of his head. Very important, as shrapnel might be flying around from the big guns, the shells that are going off all the time. I'm sure you got, this is his kit bag, and that's where the song, pack up your troubles in your old kit bag, that song comes from there. And this is his rifle. Right, question 2. So we found out a bit about the trenches in question 1. Question 2, why was World War I a trench war? Okay, I'm going to talk about 6 different reasons why World War I became a trench war, and later you're going to write a little bit about these reasons. If we go too fast or you get a bit lost, you can come back to these later. So this is the first thing. This is in 1914 was a new invention. It's called a machine gun. Nowadays they're much lighter, but in those days they're really heavy, and it took 2 people to operate the machine gun. This guy here, he's holding the bullets, and he has to feed them through to this chap who's firing the gun. So they won't be able to move around with this gun. They just have to keep it there. You'll wonder what they've got here. Any ideas? That's it. It's a gas mask. So in World War I, gas was often used, especially chlorine and mustard gas. And so if they obviously, either there has been gas being used or they think the opposition is going to use gas, so they're wearing their gas mask. So machine guns made it very difficult to take the enemy's trench, because you're advancing towards the enemy with your rifle, and on the end of your rifle you've probably been told to attach a knife called a bayonet. And so you're charging towards the enemy with your rifle, and on the end is a bayonet. It's basically like a knife, and you're up against people who have a machine gun. So reason number one why World War I became a trench war is machine guns had been invented. These two are British generals. He's the man at home in charge of the war. He's called Lord Kitchener, and you will have seen his poster before. Very famous. And in this poster, he is encouraging people to join the army. And remember, everybody that was in the army was a volunteer. So they weren't forced to join the army, but everybody wanted to join, like you saw in the first picture where they were all cheering and they want to join up as soon as possible. So Lord Kitchener, and this man's in charge of the army out in France, and he's called General Haig. Now, these two chaps, there's nothing wrong with them, but they were both quite old and were brought up with their military experience being very much a long time before World War I, before the invention of machine guns especially. And so their ideas about how we're going to fight the war were quite old-fashioned. Reason number two why the war was a trench war, the generals were old-fashioned. Here's the way people used to fight wars. And this is a famous battle called the Charge of the Light Brigade. So these are British soldiers charging, very brave. And you can see this is the leader. He's saying charge, and he's got on here is a sign that his men can follow, so they'll know where they're headed for. And they've got swords as they charge into battle. And that's the sort of battle that the old-fashioned generals were expecting. And so they sent the soldiers in to charge, either sometimes with horses, but mostly just on foot. They sent them in and they used old-fashioned tactics. That's reason three. So if you take those old-fashioned tactics of charging bravely, here's the soldier with his bayonet. Next one, they've all got their bayonets on, and they've been told to charge. So they go over the top of their trench, over the parapet, over the sandbags, and off they go. This might be one of these, certainly a little bit further ahead, might possibly be their officer who's setting the example by heading off first. So off they go. This is a very, very dangerous, this type of attack, when the enemy has got one of the machine guns that we saw in the earlier picture. And as they are heading off with their bayonets to try and take the opposition trench, sadly, many of these would have been killed or injured, and often that only took a few minutes. Reason 4, in World War I, it was extremely difficult to attack and defeat an enemy trench. A trench was a good way of protecting yourself, so the defensive side had the best of this war. If the British people were defending, or the French were defending their trench against the Germans, they would kill most of the German attackers as well, in the same way, using machine guns. So when both sides tried to attack, it was almost impossible to get forward and take the enemy's trench. And so the war got stuck and stayed in roughly the same place in Belgium and northern France for the whole of the 4 years. Now, this doesn't happen anymore in modern warfare, and even in World War II. World War II wasn't a trench war because new technology had come into warfare, and this is an example of it. This is a World War II tank, and these tanks are very fast. If you were trying to hide from one of these in a trench, I'm afraid the tank would roll over you and probably kill you. So World War II didn't use trenches. Now, why didn't they have tanks in World War I? Well, they did. Britain reinvented tanks. They were invented in Norfolk in 1915, but they weren't very effective, these tanks. They are incredibly heavy, these early tanks, and they move very, very slowly on these caterpillar tracks. Apparently, even a healthy young man wouldn't be able to survive inside one of these for more than a few hours because it would fill up with smoke and it would be shaking around so much that you would have to stop. So these tanks were invented, and they did start to be used in 1916, But even when they were used on the Battle of the Somme, and they did create a hole in the German lines, but then the British generals weren't ready for that situation, and they didn't send many soldiers in to this gap they'd created. So they basically weren't used properly. Reason 5, tanks were basic and weren't used effectively. Modern warfare, we have aircraft. This is a World War II aircraft. This is a Spitfire, as you probably recognise. And while we're on this subject, the Spitfire was invented down the road in Southampton. And in World War II, if somebody was hiding in a trench, then a plane could come along and either strafe them with a machine gun from the air, or a heavier plane than this could come along and bomb them. So trenches were never used again. World War I is the only war where trenches were used. Planes had been invented by World War I, but this is what they were like. They're very, very lightweight, and they'd usually only have one person in them. And that one person wasn't able to carry any heavy bombs or even a machine gun. And they usually only used planes in World War I to fly overhead, to fly over the enemy's lines and see if they could work out where all the soldiers were and maybe try and take a photograph. So, reason 6, planes were light in World War I and couldn't carry bombs. So those are your 6 reasons. Now, your first task, I'll just go over the 6 reasons actually first before we do that. So 6 reasons why World War I was a trench war. Number 1, machine guns. Number 2, the generals had old-fashioned ideas. Number 3, they used old-fashioned tactics. 4, the attacking side was very difficult to attack and defeat an enemy trench. 5, the tanks were very basic, very heavy, very slow. 6, aeroplanes had only just been invented. Nowadays you could bomb the enemy's lines, but not then. Right, so your first task is you're going to write about why World War I was a trench war, using the 6 reasons. Here's an example. So on your piece of paper, or in your book if you've got it, you're going to write reason 1. The machine gun had just been invented. Then if you could underline your title, that would be much appreciated. Here's an example. You can use mine, that's fine. This is a waggle for the first paragraph. The other paragraphs, you're going to write them yourself. So here's my first paragraph. The machine gun made it very easy to defend a trench in World War I. Machine guns were too heavy to carry for the attackers. Defenders, who were protected by a trench, had a massive advantage over attackers with only rifles and bayonets. Neither side could advance, and the war dragged on for 4 years. Then when you've written that, you'll leave a line, and you'll put in your next heading, and write a paragraph about the generals. If you can't remember, just go back earlier in the video, and just pick that up again. And so gradually you'll be able to get down all 6 reasons. Okay, so that's your first task. Second task, you're going to draw and label this diagram in your book or on your paper. So here's the diagram, and when you've written in the words here like fire step and ammunition shelf, then next to that you're going to label it, and you're going to explain what the different words mean. The fire step. So here's an example. This is where the soldier would stand to shoot at the enemy. The rest of the time he would stand lower down on the duck boards to avoid being shot himself. Then you go on to the next one. Sandbags, explain what they do, and so on, the dugout, the ammunition shelf, etc., etc. So task number 1 is to write about why World War I was a trench war, and task number 2, draw and label the trench diagram. When you've done those things, you can email me your writing or send a photograph of what you've done. And last week's work was superb, so well done for that. And if you send me work of the same standard, I'll be very impressed. Okay, take care everybody, and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks a lot, bye.